Spring 1873, Montana Territory. Grace Owens stood at the edge of her father's cattle ranch, watching the distant horizon where the mountains met the sky. At 22, with honey blonde hair that caught the sunlight and eyes the color of summer sage, she had grown used to waiting. Her simple calico dress, practical for ranch life yet somehow elegant on her slender frame, fluttered in the breeze as she shielded her eyes from the bright morning light. "He won't be back, Gracie," her father's voice came from behind her. "Cowboys like that don't settle, the trail's in their blood." Grace didn't turn around, didn't want her father to see the stubborn hope in her eyes. "You don't know him like I do." "I know his kind. Riley Blackstone promised to return last spring too." The disappointment in her father's voice matched the doubt that sometimes crept into her own heart during the coldest winter nights. But Grace held on to what she believed. Riley had made a promise, and in the 3 years she'd known him, he had never broken his word. Even as the Montana winter had stretched endlessly before her, not just this past winter, but the one before it too, she had kept her faith. The problem was out here on the frontier, faith was a dangerous thing to have. Grace had watched too many women pin their hopes on men who disappeared into the vast wilderness, never to return. The West was no place for fairy tales. It was a place of harsh realities, where survival took precedence over romance, where practical concerns, food, shelter, protection, mattered more than matters of the heart. That was the lesson her mother's death had taught her 10 years ago. Love wasn't enough to keep someone alive in this merciless country. Grace had built walls around her heart after losing her mother to the frontier's cruelty, believing that emotional attachment was a luxury no one could afford out here. Then Riley Blackstone had ridden onto their ranch 2 springs ago, and everything had changed. Grace turned from the horizon, finally facing her father. "I have chores to attend to." She walked past him, her boots crunching on the still frosted ground. Spring was coming late this year, just as Riley was, if he was coming at all. Samuel Owens, a weathered rancher who had carved his spread from the wilderness after the war, watched his daughter go with concern etched into the lines of his face. He'd seen too many young women wither away waiting for men who never returned. Grace spent the morning in the chicken coop, gathering eggs with mechanical precision, her mind drifting back to when she first met Riley. He'd arrived with a cattle drive, a young cowboy of 24 with sunlight and brown hair and eyes the color of warm coffee. Unlike the other cowhands, he'd been clean-shaven, respectful, and possessed a quiet intelligence that caught her attention immediately. "Miss Owens," he had said, hat in hand, "your father mentioned you might have some fresh bread to spare for hungry cowboys." She remembered how she'd tried to maintain her distance. "We might, though I suspect it's the coffee you're really after." He'd smiled then, a smile that reached his eyes. "I wouldn't turn down coffee from a lady as pretty as yourself, but truthfully, I heard tell all the way in Bozeman that the Owens Ranch serves the finest sourdough bread in the territory." That was how it began. A simple conversation about bread that somehow, over the course of that spring, blossomed into something more. Riley had stayed on, hired by her father to help with the spring calving and mending fences damaged by the harsh winter. But summer had called him back to the trail. "I've got commitments," he'd explained on their last night together. They'd stood by the creek that ran through the eastern edge of her father's property, the setting sun painting the water gold. "A man's word is all he has out here." "And what word do you give me?" she had asked, trying to sound unconcerned though her heart hammered in her chest. "That I'll come back." He'd taken her hand then, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "When the spring comes again, I'll return." But he hadn't. Not that next spring. A letter had arrived instead, carried by a passing freighter. Riley explained about complications with the cattle drive, about a promise to help a friend start a ranch in Wyoming. He wrote of his intentions to return the following spring, his words earnest and apologetic. Grace had folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her dresser drawer, and continued waiting. Now, as she collected the last of the eggs, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leaped before she could temper her reaction. Visitors were common enough in spring, traders, travelers, cowboys looking for work as the ranching season began. She stepped out of the chicken coop, basket in hand, and squinted toward the main road that led to the ranch house. A lone rider approached, his figure backlit by the morning sun. Grace stood frozen, unwilling to hope yet unable to move. The rider drew closer, and she could make out the shape of him now, tall and straight-backed in the saddle, a cowboy's easy grace in the way he handled his horse. Her breath caught when he removed his hat, revealing that familiar profile, the light brown hair now longer than she remembered. Riley Blackstone had returned, just as the last of winter's grip was loosening on the land. Grace set down her basket with deliberate care, forcing herself to move slowly when every part of her wanted to run to him. She had waited 2 winters for this moment. She could wait another few minutes. Riley spotted her and changed course, guiding his horse directly toward the chicken coop. As he drew closer, Grace could see the changes in him. His face was more weathered, his frame leaner but somehow stronger. At 26 now, he had the look of a man who had found his purpose. "Miss Owens," he called, his voice carrying on the crisp spring air. "Still keeping those chickens in line, I see." A smile broke across her face despite her determination to remain composed. "Someone has to," she replied. "They're terrible at following directions." Riley dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to the post near the coop. He approached her slowly, hat still in hand. "You look just the same," he said softly. "You don't," she answered honestly. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Is that good or bad?" "I haven't decided yet." A tension hung between them, 2 years of absence stretching like a physical barrier. Grace had imagined this moment countless times during the long winter evenings, but now that it was here, she found herself at a loss. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms. Another part wanted to demand explanations for his extended absence. "Your father still likely to shoot trespassers?" Riley asked, glancing toward the main house. "Only the ones who break promises." Riley nodded solemnly. "Then I better speak with him first." He hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag. "But before I do, I wanted to give you this." He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Grace accepted it, their fingers brushing momentarily. "What is it?" "Open it." She carefully untied the string and folded back the paper. Inside lay a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Grace ran her fingers over the embossed cover. "I remembered you saying you loved poetry but had read all your books a dozen times over," Riley explained. "I found this in Denver last fall." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her. That he had remembered such a small detail from their conversations 2 years ago spoke volumes. "Thank you," she said, clutching the book to her chest. "It's perfect." Riley smiled, the uncertainty in his eyes giving way to something warmer. "I have more to tell you, Grace. About why I've been gone so long and why I've come back." He glanced toward the main house again. "But I should speak with your father first, proper respect and all." Grace nodded, appreciating his adherence to propriety, even as impatience fluttered within her. "He's probably in the barn. The new foal came last night." Another successful delivery then. "Yes, mother and foal are doing well." Riley placed his hat back on his head. "I'll find him. After, maybe we could walk down by the creek." "Like old times." "I'd like that." As Riley led his horse toward the barn, Grace watched him go, the book of poetry still pressed against her heart. His return had thrown her carefully constructed defenses into disarray. For 2 years she had maintained that the frontier was no place for romantic notions, that practical concerns must take precedence over matters of the heart. Yet here he was, and with him, all the feelings she had tried to rationalize away. Grace returned to the house, placing the eggs in the kitchen and the book on her bedside table. Through the window, she could see Riley and her father emerging from the barn, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Her younger sister, Abigail, 17 and full of romantic notions, bounded into the room. "Is that really him, Riley Blackstone, the one you've been pining over?" "I haven't been pining," Grace protested, though the flush in her cheeks betrayed her. "You've been watching that horizon every morning since he left," Abigail countered. "If that's not pining, I don't know what is." Grace couldn't argue. Instead, she busied herself with starting dinner preparations, though her attention kept drifting to the window where she could see Riley and her father still deep in conversation. "What do you think they're talking about?" Abigail asked, peering over her shoulder. "Ranch business, I imagine. Perhaps Riley's looking for work again." Abigail gave her a knowing look. "Or perhaps he's asking for something else entirely." Grace shooed her sister away from the window. "Don't get ahead of yourself. He's been gone 2 years. People change." "But feelings don't," Abigail said with the confidence of youth. "Not real ones." Grace wasn't so sure. The Riley she had fallen for had been 24, still finding his way in the world. The man who had returned seemed more purposeful, more determined. She wondered if his feelings for her had remained as constant as hers had for him. Later that afternoon, as promised, Grace met Riley by the creek. The water ran higher and faster than usual, fed by melting snow from the mountains. They walked along its banks, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken words. "Your father gave me quite the interrogation," Riley finally said. "He's protective." As he should be, Riley stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "I owe you an explanation, Grace, about why I didn't return last spring." Grace steeled herself, uncertain what revelations might come. "I'm listening." Riley took a deep breath. "The letter I sent wasn't entirely truthful. Yes, I was helping a friend establish a ranch in Wyoming, but that wasn't what kept me away." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I didn't want to come back empty-handed." "Empty-handed?" "When I left here 2 springs ago, I had nothing to my name except my horse, saddle, and the wages your father paid me. I couldn't," he stopped, frustration evident in his expression. "I couldn't offer you the kind of life you deserve with so little." Grace felt a mix of emotions at his revelation, touched by his concern for her welfare, yet frustrated by his presumption. "You thought I needed you to have money before you could return." "Not just money, stability, a future." Riley gestured to the landscape around them. "The frontier is no place for uncertainty, Grace. I've seen too many families struggle, too many women work to the bone trying to carve a life from this wilderness. And you thought I wasn't strong enough for that life." A hint of anger colored her words. "No," Riley said quickly. "I knew you were strong enough, too strong maybe, strong enough to refuse a man who couldn't provide properly." Grace shook her head, a complicated mix of emotions rising within her. "So instead of letting me make that decision, you made it for me. You stayed away." Riley had the grace to look ashamed. "I wanted to be worthy of you." "Worthy," the word struck a nerve. "You think worthiness is measured in dollars and cents. Out here, often it is." Riley's voice held the weight of hard-earned knowledge. "Love doesn't stop a blizzard or feed hungry children. I've seen good people, people who loved each other fiercely, broken by the realities of frontier life." His words hit close to home, echoing her own fears about attachment in such an unforgiving place. Yet hearing them from his lips made Grace realize something important. They shared the same fundamental misunderstanding about love's place on the frontier. "So what changed?" she asked, softening her tone. "Why come back now?" A small smile played at the corners of Riley's mouth. "Because I finally have something to offer." He hesitated, then continued. "That ranch in Wyoming, my friend Thomas and I built it from nothing. We've got a decent herd now, good grazing land with water rights, even a proper house." Pride was evident in his voice, and Grace felt a strange mixture of happiness for his success and sadness that it had kept him from her for so long. "I'm pleased for you," she said sincerely. "Truly, Riley, you've accomplished what many men only dream of." "I didn't do it for the accomplishment," Riley said, stepping closer to her. "I did it so I could come back to you with more than just promises." The intensity in his eyes made Grace's heart quicken. "And what are you offering now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Riley reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the afternoon sunlight. A ring, simple but beautiful, a small sapphire set in silver. "I'm offering a future, Grace, together, if you'll have me." The sight of the ring took her breath away. This was the moment she had dreamed of through 2 long winters, yet now that it was here, doubt crept in. Not doubt about her feelings for Riley, but doubt about the foundation of his proposal. "Did you think I wouldn't accept you without all this?" she asked. "The ranch, the success, the ring." Riley looked taken aback. "I thought I wanted to be able to give you the life you deserve." "What if I didn't want to wait 2 years for that life to begin?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, carrying all the loneliness and frustration of the time they'd spent apart. "What if all I wanted was you, Riley, just as you were?" Confusion clouded his features. "Are you saying you don't want this?" "I'm saying you made assumptions about what I needed. You decided what was best for me without asking." Grace took a step back, needing distance to clear her thoughts. "You let your fear of not being enough keep you away for 2 years." Riley closed his hand around the ring, his expression troubled. "I never saw it that way. Of course not, because you were raised to believe a man's worth is in what he owns, what he can provide. Grace softened her tone. But out here on the frontier, those rules don't always apply. Sometimes survival means something different. A tense silence fell between them, broken only by the rushing of the creek. Grace hadn't expected their reunion to unfold this way. She had imagined joy, relief, perhaps tears of happiness, not this complicated tangle of emotions. Riley finally spoke, his voice subdued. I thought I was doing the right thing. I wanted to be the kind of man who could take care of you properly. And I appreciate that intention, Grace said, but I needed the man, not just his prospects. She took a deep breath. I spent 2 winters waiting, Riley. Every day wondering if today would be the day you returned. Do you know what that's like? The pain in her voice seemed to reach him. Riley's expression softened, regret evident in his eyes. I never meant to cause you pain, I thought. I thought I was protecting you from a harder life. Protection isn't always what we need most, Grace said. She gestured to the land around them. The frontier teaches us that. Sometimes what we need is someone who stands beside us through the storms, not someone who tries to shield us from them entirely. Riley nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. I've been a fool, haven't I? A small smile tugged at Grace's lips, perhaps, but in well-intentioned one. Does that earn me any mercy? Perhaps that too. Grace reached out, touching his arm gently. I just need you to understand something, Riley. If we're to have any future together, it needs to be built on truth and equal partnership, not on one person deciding what's best for the other. Riley covered her hand with his own. I can promise you that, no more assumptions, no more decisions made alone. He hesitated, then added, I love you, Grace Owens. I have since that first spring. Everything I've done, right or wrong, has been with you in mind. The words she had longed to hear for 2 years washed over her like a warm breeze. I love you too, she admitted, even when I tried not to, even when I told myself the frontier was no place for such failings. Riley opened his hand, the ring catching the light once more. I know I've gone about this all wrong, but my intention remains true. Will you marry me, Grace? Will you build a life with me, whether that's here or in Wyoming or wherever our path leads? Grace looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. Despite everything, her heart was certain. Yes, she said simply, I will. Relief and joy transformed Riley's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Perhaps it had been. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the creek bank, Grace and Riley walked back toward the ranch house, hand in hand. The future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the Montana sky, but both knew the path wouldn't be simple. The understanding they'd reached was just the beginning. The real work of building a life together on the frontier, with all its hardships and joys, still lay ahead. Your father gave his blessing, you know, Riley said as they neared the house. Though he did threaten bodily harm if I ever stayed away that long again. Grace laughed. He means it too. I believe him, Riley squeezed her hand, but he won't have cause to worry. Where you are is where I'll be from now on. As they approached the ranch house, light spilling from its windows into the gathering dusk, Grace felt a certainty she hadn't known in years. The frontier might be unforgiving, the future unpredictable, but some things were worth the risk. Some connections were strong enough to survive even the harshest winters. The wedding was planned for midsummer, when the ranch work would slow enough for celebrations, and the mountain wildflowers would be in full bloom. Grace had insisted on waiting, wanting time to truly reacquaint herself with the man Riley had become during their separation. In the weeks that followed his return, they fell into a rhythm much like the one they'd shared 2 years earlier, yet different in subtle, important ways. Riley worked alongside her father and the ranch hands, his experience from building his own operation in Wyoming proving valuable as spring calving continued and new pastures were prepared for summer grazing. But unlike before, when work had occupied most of their time together, they now made deliberate efforts to learn about each other's lives during their time apart. Each evening, they would walk along the creek or sit on the porch, sharing stories and rebuilding the connection that distance had strained but never broken. Tell me about Wyoming, Grace urged one evening as they sat on a fallen log near their favorite spot by the creek. What's your ranch like? Riley's eyes lit up with pride. It's in a valley just east of the Bighorns. Not as dramatic as your mountains here, but beautiful in its own way. The creek that runs through the property never runs dry, even in the worst drought years. And the house, you mentioned you built a proper house. It's modest but solid. 2 bedrooms, a good-sized kitchen. Thomas and I built it ourselves last summer. Riley hesitated, then added, I made sure the windows face east. I know you like to watch the sunrise. The thoughtfulness of this detail, that he had built with her preferences in mind, even when unsure if she would ever see it, touched Grace deeply. You'll have to make some changes now, she teased gently. My sister is convinced she's coming to visit as soon as we're settled. Riley laughed. Abigail is always welcome, though I should warn you, the nearest neighbors are 5 miles away. It's a far cry from having your family just through the door. Grace considered this. Will it be lonely, do you think? At times, perhaps. Riley took her hand, his expression growing serious. That's one of the reasons I waited, Grace. Frontier life can be isolating, especially for women. I've seen it break the strongest spirits. Yet women have been settling the frontier alongside men since the beginning, Grace pointed out. My mother did it. And died young because of it, Riley said softly. The truth of his words hung between them. Grace's mother had died of a fever when Grace was 12, the nearest doctor 2 days' ride away and unable to arrive in time. That wasn't the frontier's fault, Grace said eventually. Illness can strike anywhere. But the isolation made it worse. Riley squeezed her hand. I'm not trying to frighten you, but I want you to understand what you're agreeing to. Wyoming is even more remote than here. Our nearest town is a full day's ride. Grace appreciated his honesty. I know the challenges, Riley. I've lived them my entire life, but I also know the rewards. And what rewards are those? He asked, genuinely curious. Freedom, space to breathe, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands, Grace smiled, and sunrises that make you believe in heaven. Riley nodded, his expression softening. That's true enough. Besides, Grace continued, we won't be completely alone. You mentioned your partner, Thomas. Yes, though he's talking of bringing his own family out next year. His brother and sister-in-law are considering joining us too. Riley ran his thumb across her knuckles. We could build something special there, Grace, a real community in time. The prospect was both exciting and daunting. To leave everything she had known, the security of her father's established ranch, for the uncertainty of a new start in an even more remote territory, it would be no small leap of faith. But as she looked at Riley, at the future shining in his eyes, Grace found her doubts quieting. This was the man she had waited through 2 winters for, the man whose memory had kept her warm on the coldest nights. I think, she said carefully, that home isn't always about the place. Sometimes it's about the people you build it with. Riley's smile was like sunrise breaking. That's exactly how I feel. As spring progressed into early summer, preparations for both the wedding and Grace's eventual departure for Wyoming occupied most of her time. Her father, though supportive of the match, struggled with the reality that his eldest daughter would soon be living hundreds of miles away. You don't have to go to Wyoming, he told her one evening as they sat on the porch. Riley could stay on here. This ranch will be yours and Abigail's someday. There's more than enough work and land for another family. Grace considered the offer. It would be easier in many ways, staying where everything was familiar, where her family remained close, where the community knew and respected her. Have you spoken to Riley about this? She asked. Samuel Owens nodded. He said the decision was yours to make, that he'd be happy wherever you were. The response didn't surprise Grace. Since his return, Riley had been true to his word about making decisions together, about respecting her voice and choices. His ranch is just beginning, Grace said thoughtfully. The work of years is just starting to bear fruit. It would be a shame to abandon it now. Your mother would say the same thing, Samuel admitted with a sad smile. She always did have an eye for the practical. I learned from the best. Grace reached over to squeeze her father's hand. But it doesn't mean I'm eager to leave you and Abigail behind. You're my family. And we always will be. Distance doesn't change that. Samuel sighed, gazing out at the land he had worked for decades. I just worry about you being so far away, with winter blocking the passes for months at a time. I worry too, Grace admitted, but Riley has built something for us. Something that could grow into a legacy of our own. Samuel nodded slowly. Your mind's made up then. I think it has been since he returned. Grace looked out at the sunset painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. But we'll visit, and you and Abigail will always have a place with us in Wyoming. Her father squeezed her hand in return. Just be happy, Gracie, that's all I've ever wanted for you. As the wedding day approached, a new worry began to gnaw at Grace. Though she and Riley had rekindled their connection, though they had talked through their past and planned their future, one subject remained largely untouched. The physical aspect of marriage, their courtship, both before Riley's departure and since his return, had been conducted with propriety. A few stolen kisses, hand-holding during their walks, embraces that lingered but never crossed the boundaries of respectability. But marriage would bring new intimacies, experiences Grace had only a theoretical understanding of. One afternoon, while helping her prepare her trousseau, Abigail broached the subject with the directness of youth. "Are you nervous?" "About the wedding night," she asked, folding a nightgown into the trunk that would accompany Grace to Wyoming. Grace nearly dropped the linens she was sorting. "Abigail, that's hardly an appropriate question." "Who else am I supposed to ask?" "Mother isn't here," Abigail's voice softened on the last words, "and Mrs. Peterson only says it's a wife's duty, which doesn't sound particularly encouraging." The mention of their neighbor, a well-meaning but severe widow in her 50s, made Grace smile despite her embarrassment. "I don't think Mrs. Peterson is the best authority on the subject." "So you are nervous," Abigail pressed. Grace sighed, realizing her sister's curiosity came from a genuine place. "A little," she admitted. "It's natural to be uncertain about new experiences." "But you love Riley." "Very much." "Then shouldn't that make it easier? The unknown, I mean." The simple wisdom in her sister's words struck Grace. Love didn't eliminate uncertainty, but it did provide a foundation of trust that made stepping into the unknown less frightening. "Yes," she said finally, "I suppose it does." The day before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Thomas Caldwell, Riley's partner from Wyoming, rode in just as the family was sitting down to supper. "Thought I should come meet the woman who's captured my friend's heart," he explained as introductions were made. "And to stand with Riley tomorrow, if you'll have me." Thomas was several years older than Riley, with a weathered face that spoke of a life spent outdoors and kind eyes that immediately put Grace at ease. Over dinner, he shared stories of their ranch-building adventures in Wyoming, filling in details Riley had omitted or downplayed. "He nearly killed himself getting that house built before winter," Thomas revealed. "Worked from sunrise to well past sunset every day. I told him no woman would care if the porch railing had fancy carvings, but he insisted it should be done right." Riley looked embarrassed. "I wanted it to be worthy of bringing a bride home to." "And he wouldn't stop talking about you," Thomas continued, addressing Grace directly. "Grace would like the view from this hill. Grace would appreciate the wildflowers in this meadow. Grace would know how to make this house feel like a home." Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest at these revelations. "I had no idea," she said softly. "That was the point," Riley admitted. "I didn't want you to know how much I was planning for a future I wasn't certain of. It seemed presumptuous." "I'd call it hopeful," Grace corrected him gently. Later that evening, with Thomas settled in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, Grace found herself alone with Riley on the porch. The summer night was warm, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Thomas seems like a good man," Grace said. "I'm glad you had someone watching out for you." "He is." "The best." Riley leaned against the porch railing. "He lost his wife 5 years ago, cholera. That's why he was willing to start fresh in Wyoming with me. Too many memories in Colorado." The information added another layer to Grace's understanding of Riley's concerns about frontier hardship. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of isolation and limited medical care. "Yet he's bringing his family out now," she observed, "his brother and sister-in-law." Riley nodded. "He says enough time has passed, that life has to go on." "He's right." Grace moved closer, resting her hand atop Riley's on the railing. "Life does go on, sometimes in ways we don't expect." Riley turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Are you having any second thoughts, Grace, about tomorrow, about Wyoming, about any of it?" The directness of the question deserved an equally direct answer. "No second thoughts about marrying you," she said firmly. "Some natural nervousness about the rest, but that's to be expected." Relief softened his features. Good, because I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He leaned forward, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of all the love and longing of their time apart. Grace responded in kind, allowing herself to believe fully, finally, that their waiting was nearly over. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the kind of summer morning that made the harsh Montana winters seem like a distant dream. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful, held in the meadow near the creek where they had spent so many hours together. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved for this day. The ivory satin, slightly yellowed with age but still elegant, had been altered to fit her taller frame. Wildflowers adorned her honey blonde hair, which she wore loose around her shoulders at Riley's request. "You look like a dream," Abigail whispered as she helped make the final adjustments to the dress. "Riley won't know what hit him." Indeed, when Grace walked toward him on her father's arm, Riley's expression of awe and adoration was everything she could have hoped for. He stood tall and handsome in a new suit, his normally tousled brown hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Grace would later remember fragments, the weight of her father's hand as he placed hers in Riley's, the slight tremor in Riley's voice as he recited his vows, the cool slide of the gold band as he placed it on her finger to join her engagement ring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the traveling preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Riley's kiss was gentle but held a promise of the deeper connection to come, a promise that sent a shiver of anticipation through Grace despite the summer warmth. The celebration afterwards stretched well into the evening. Neighbors from miles around had gathered, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. A makeshift dance floor had been constructed near the barn, and as twilight fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Blackstone?" Riley asked, extending his hand with a formal bow that made Grace laugh. "Mrs. Blackstone," she repeated, testing the sound of her new name. "I think I like it." "I'm rather fond of it myself." Riley pulled her into his arms as the fiddle player struck up a waltz. As they moved together across the dance floor, Grace felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by family and friends, poised on the brink of a new adventure. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Riley led her away from the crowd, toward the small cabin at the edge of the property that her father had prepared for their wedding night. Tomorrow they would begin the long journey to Wyoming, but tonight was theirs alone. Inside, someone Abigail, Grace suspected, had lit candles and placed wildflowers in a jar by the bed. The simple space had been transformed into something almost magical. "Nervous?" Riley asked softly, closing the door behind them. "A little," Grace admitted. "You?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Terrified." His honest admission broke the tension, and they both laughed, the shared vulnerability drawing them closer. "We'll figure it out together," Grace said, reaching up to touch his face. "Like everything else." Riley caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Together," he agreed. "That's how we'll face everything from now on." As the candles burned low, husband and wife discovered each other fully for the first time, their connection deepening in ways both physical and spiritual. The last barriers between them fell away, replaced by an intimacy that transcended their 2 years apart. In the quiet aftermath, Grace lay in Riley's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Outside, the sounds of the celebration had faded, replaced by the familiar chorus of a Montana summer night, crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through pine needles. "What are you thinking?" Riley asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair. "That it was worth it," Grace replied. "The waiting, even through those long winters, it was worth it for this." Riley's arms tightened around her. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that wait." Grace believed him, whatever challenges lay ahead, the journey to Wyoming, building a life in an even more remote wilderness, the inevitable hardships the frontier would bring, they would face them together. Some connections, she had learned, were indeed strong enough to survive even the harshest winters. The journey to Wyoming took nearly 3 weeks. They traveled by wagon, part of a small caravan that included Thomas Caldwell, 2 families heading for Oregon, and a young doctor relocating to a growing settlement near the Wyoming-Montana border. Riley had arranged everything with careful attention to detail, ensuring Grace's comfort as much as possible on the difficult journey. Still, the realities of frontier travel were inescapable, dust that seemed to penetrate everything, meals cooked over campfires, bathing reduced to quick splashes in whatever creek or river they happened to camp near. "Is it much farther?" Grace asked one evening as they sat by the fire. They had been traveling through increasingly rugged country for days, the wagon wheels jolting over rocky terrain that seemed determined to shake them to pieces. "Just over that next ridge," Riley promised, pointing to the shadowy outline of hills visible in the fading light. "Tomorrow you'll see our valley for the first time." Grace tried to imagine it, the place that would be her home, the land where she and Riley would build their future together. Despite her exhaustion, excitement flickered within her. What if I don't love it? The question slipped out before she could stop it, voicing a fear she'd been harboring silently. Riley's expression grew serious. "Then we'll figure something out. This isn't a prison sentence, Grace. If you're truly unhappy there, we'll find another place." His reassurance eased the knot of anxiety that had been building in her chest as they drew closer to their destination. "I want to love it," she said honestly. "I want to see it through your eyes." "You will," Riley said, confidence warming his voice. "I know you will." The next day, as they crested the final ridge, Grace got her first view of what Riley had been working toward for the past 2 years. The valley spread below them, a green jewel nestled between rising hills. A creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, and in the distance she could make out the shapes of buildings, a main house, a barn, corrals, and what appeared to be the beginnings of additional structures. "There it is," Riley said softly. "Home." Grace studied the landscape, taking in every detail. It wasn't as dramatic as the Montana mountains she had grown up with, but it had its own beauty, gentler, more intimate somehow. She could see why Riley had chosen this place, why he had worked so hard to claim it. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. The relief on Riley's face was evident. He had been more anxious about her reaction than he had let on. "Wait until you see it up close," he said, taking the reins again to guide their wagon down the slope. As they approached, Grace could see more clearly what Riley and Thomas had accomplished in 2 years. The main house, though modest as Riley had described, was well built, with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. The barn was large and sturdy, with corrals extending from it that currently held about a dozen horses. In the distance she could see cattle grazing on the hillsides. "We've got about 200 head now," Riley explained, following her gaze. "Not a large herd yet, but growing. The grazing is good here year-round, even in winter if the snow isn't too deep." They pulled up in front of the house, and Riley set the brake before coming around to help Grace down from the wagon. She stood for a moment taking it all in, the house that would be hers, the land that would support them, the future that awaited. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackstone," Riley said, a hint of nervousness still lingering in his voice. Grace turned to face him, seeing all the love and hope in his eyes. "Thank you for building this for us," she said simply. Riley's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Taking her hand, he led her up the steps and across the porch to the front door. "Tradition demands," he said, and before Grace could respond, he had swept her into his arms. Grace laughed as he carried her across the threshold. "I thought that was only for the wedding night." "I'm making up for lost time," Riley replied, setting her down carefully in what appeared to be the main living area of the house. Grace looked around, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair placed nearby. A sturdy table with 4 chairs stood in what served as the dining area, and through an open doorway, she could see the kitchen with its iron cookstove and wooden cupboards. "It's not fancy," Riley said, watching her reaction carefully, "but it's solid, and we can add to it as needed." Grace moved through the space, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table, feeling the craftsmanship in every piece Riley had built. "Show me the rest," she urged. Riley led her through the house, the kitchen with its pump that brought water directly inside, no more hauling buckets from the creek, he pointed out proudly. The main bedroom with its large window facing east just as he had promised, and the second bedroom that he suggested might one day belong to a child. The thought of children, their children, in this house brought a flush to Grace's cheeks. It was no longer a distant dream but a real possibility, a natural extension of the life they were beginning together. "What do you think?" Riley asked when the tour was complete. "Will it do?" Grace turned to him, seeing all the hope and love and pride in his expression. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "Absolutely perfect." Relief and joy washed over Riley's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I was so afraid you'd be disappointed, that it wouldn't measure up to your father's ranch." Grace leaned back to look at him. "Riley Blackstone, when will you understand? It's not the size of the ranch or the house that matters to me. It's that you built this with your own hands, thinking of me with every nail you drove and every board you placed." She reached up to touch his face. "That makes it more precious than the grandest mansion." The kiss they shared then was a promise of the life they would build together in this house, on this land, with the love that had survived 2 years of separation and uncertainty. The following days were a flurry of activity as Grace settled into her new home and role. There was much to learn, the peculiarities of the cook stove, which operated differently from the one she was accustomed to. The location of the best berry patches along the creek, the names and personalities of the half-dozen ranch hands who worked for Riley and Thomas. Thomas himself proved to be a wealth of information and support, treating Grace with a brotherly affection that helped ease her transition. His own cabin was situated about a quarter-mile from the main house, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. "Riley wouldn't stop talking about you the entire time we were building this place," Thomas told her one afternoon as he helped her establish a kitchen garden near the house. "I feel like I knew you before we ever met." Grace laughed as she marked rows for planting. "All good things, I hope." "Nothing but," Thomas handed her a packet of bean seeds, though I will say his description didn't do you justice. He failed to mention you were as capable as you are beautiful. The compliment brought a blush to Grace's cheeks. "You're too kind, I still have much to learn about ranching on this scale." "You'll learn quickly," Thomas assured her. "And Riley couldn't be happier to have you here. I've never seen the man smile so much." As the summer progressed into fall, Grace found her rhythm in her new home. She took over management of the household, established her garden, learned to work with the ranch hands, and began to know the land as intimately as she had known her father's ranch in Montana. Each day brought new discoveries: a hidden meadow filled with wildflowers that Riley showed her on a Sunday ride, the perfect swimming hole in the creek for hot summer afternoons. The way the sunset painted the western hills in shades of gold and crimson, and each night brought a deepening of the connection between herself and Riley. The physical aspects of marriage, once uncertain and new, became a source of joy and comfort, a private language of love and trust that bound them ever closer. By the time the first snow fell in early November, Grace felt as though she had always belonged in this valley, in this house, with this man. The waiting of those 2 winters seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the immediate happiness of the life they were building together. But winter on the frontier brought its own challenges, as Grace well knew. The isolation that was bearable in summer became more pronounced as snow filled the passes and made travel to the nearest settlement difficult if not impossible. For weeks at a time, their world narrowed to the ranch and its immediate surroundings. "Do you miss Montana?" Riley asked one evening as they sat by the fire, watching snow fall outside the window. "Your family?" "The community there." Grace considered the question honestly. Sometimes, she admitted, especially Abigail, but letters help. She had received several since their arrival, carried by infrequent travelers willing to deliver mail along their route. "And I have you here, that makes all the difference." Riley pulled her closer on the sofa they shared. "Spring will come before you know it. Your father and Abigail promised to visit once the pass is clear." "I know," Grace rested her head against his shoulder. "And I'm not unhappy, Riley, quite the opposite. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." The conviction in her voice seemed to ease a worry Riley had been carrying. "I've thought the same thing since the day I rode into this valley," he said. "That this was where I was meant to end up. Now I know why. It was always meant to be our place, not just mine." As winter deepened, bringing shorter days and longer nights, Grace found unexpected joy in the season she had once dreaded. The isolation that had seemed so threatening before now offered a special kind of intimacy. With nowhere to go and few outside demands, she and Riley had time to truly know each other in ways that might have taken years under different circumstances. They read aloud to each other from the small collection of books they had accumulated, Riley's deep voice bringing stories to life in the flickering firelight. They played cards and checkers, taught each other songs from their childhoods, and shared memories that revealed the people they had been before they met. "I used to be afraid of winter," Grace confessed one night as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside. Not the cold or the snow, but the waiting, the feeling that life was on hold until spring came again. Riley traced patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch gentle in the darkness. And no, now I see it differently. Winter isn't just waiting for spring, it has its own purpose, its own beauty. She shifted to look at him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light, like us. Those 2 winters apart weren't just time lost, they were preparing us for this, in their own way. Riley pulled her closer. How did I get so lucky to find a woman who can find meaning in even the hardest seasons? The same way I got lucky enough to find a man worth waiting for, Grace replied, settling into his embrace. By midwinter, Grace began to suspect that their family might be expanding sooner than they had planned. Certain telltale signs, morning sickness, unusual fatigue, changes in her body, pointed to the likelihood that a child had been conceived in the early months of their marriage. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Riley. With no doctor nearby and her mother long gone, Grace relied on the knowledge passed down from older women and her own intuition. By February, there was no longer any doubt. Their first child would arrive in late summer, around the time of their first wedding anniversary. Grace chose a quiet evening to share the news, after supper was cleared away and they sat together by the fire, a familiar and comfortable ritual of their winter evenings. "I have something to tell you," she began, her heart fluttering with anticipation of Riley's reaction. Riley looked up from the book he had been reading, his attention immediately focused on her. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong." Grace took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby, our baby, sometime in August, I think." For a moment, Riley seemed frozen, the information taking time to register. Then his expression transformed, joy spreading across his features like sunrise breaking over the hills. "A baby, you're certain?" His voice held wonder and disbelief in equal measure. Grace nodded, smiling at his reaction. "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation. All the signs are there." Riley was on his feet in an instant, pulling her up into a gentle embrace. "Grace, this is incredible." He held her as if she had suddenly become fragile, precious beyond measure. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" The flood of concerned questions made Grace laugh. "I'm fine, truly. Women have been having babies on the frontier since there was a frontier. I'm healthy and strong." But her reassurances did little to dampen Riley's protective instincts. In the days that followed, he fussed over her comfort, insisted she rest more frequently, and began making plans for the baby's arrival with an enthusiasm that both touched and amused Grace. "We'll need to prepare the second bedroom," he declared one morning over breakfast. "A cradle, of course, and we should write to your father and Abigail immediately. Perhaps Abigail could come stay with us when the time draws near to help." Grace covered his hand with hers, stilling his rapid planning. "Slow down, Riley, we have months yet. The baby won't arrive until late summer." "I know, but there's so much to consider." His expression grew more serious, including the fact that the nearest doctor is a day's ride away if the weather cooperates. The concern underlying his words touched on Grace's own private worries. Childbirth on the frontier was always risky, a fact she was well aware of, but dwelling on potential dangers would serve no purpose. "We'll make arrangements when the time comes," she said with more confidence than she felt. "And I'm not the first woman to have a baby far from town." Riley nodded, though concern still shadowed his eyes. "I know, I just want everything to be perfect for you, for both of you." Grace squeezed his hand. "It will be. Because we'll face it together, just like everything else." As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, signs of new life appeared everywhere. The first green shoots pushing through the melting snow, birds returning from their southern journeys, creeks swelling with snowmelt. The promise of spring seemed to echo the new life growing within Grace, a parallel that did not escape her notice. By April, the passes had cleared enough for travel, and true to their word, Samuel and Abigail Owens arrived for a visit. Their reunion was joyful, filled with embraces and exclamations over Grace's obviously expanding waistline. "You're positively glowing," Abigail declared, hugging her sister carefully. At 18 now, she had matured during the months since the wedding, her girlish exuberance tempered by the responsibilities she had assumed in Grace's absence. "And you've grown up," Grace replied, noting the changes in her younger sister. "Father's been keeping you busy, I see." Samuel Owens embraced his daughter with gentle care. "She's become quite the rancher's daughter in your absence. Keeps the books better than I ever did." The visit stretched into weeks as Samuel and Abigail helped with spring calving and other ranch tasks. Grace treasured having her family close again, the familiar voices and shared memories filling a space in her heart she hadn't realized was empty. One afternoon, as she and Abigail hung laundry in the spring sunshine, her sister asked the question Grace had been anticipating. "Are you scared about the baby coming, I mean?" Grace considered her answer carefully. "A little," she admitted. "It's natural to be nervous about something so important." "But you're so far from town," Abigail pressed. "What if something goes wrong?" The worry in her sister's voice reflected Grace's own private fears, ones she tried not to dwell on. "We've made arrangements," she explained. "Thomas is riding to town next week to speak with the doctor, and Riley has hired a woman from the settlement to come stay with us starting in July, Mrs. Cooper. She's helped deliver dozens of babies." Abigail seemed only partially reassured. "Father wants you to come back to Montana, just until the baby is born. He's worried." The suggestion took Grace by surprise. "He hasn't mentioned this to me." "He's afraid you'll refuse." Abigail pinned a sheet to the line. "But he's right, isn't he? You'd never leave Riley, even temporarily." Grace sighed, understanding her father's concern, but certain of her decision. "This is my home now, Abby. My life is here with Riley. Our child should be born here, where we'll raise him or her." Abigail nodded slowly. "I thought you'd say that. And for what it's worth, I think you're right." She gave her sister a sidelong glance. "But I'm staying until after the baby comes. Father and I already discussed it." Grace felt a surge of gratitude for her family's love and support. "I'd like that very much," she said, pulling Abigail into a one-armed hug. "Very much indeed." Summer arrived in the valley with long, warm days and the ranch in full operation. The cattle herd had grown, requiring more hands to manage, and Riley spent long hours in the saddle, returning each evening tired but satisfied with the progress they were making. Grace's pregnancy advanced steadily, her body changing to accommodate the growing child. By July, she had reluctantly handed over most of the household management to Abigail and Mrs. Cooper, the midwife who had arrived as planned. "You're doing beautifully," Mrs. Cooper assured her during one of their regular checkups. A stout woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, she had delivered hundreds of babies during her 30 years on the frontier. "The baby is positioned well, and you're strong and healthy." "But," Grace prompted, hearing something in the older woman's tone. Mrs. Cooper smiled ruefully. "Nothing gets past you, does it? I was simply going to suggest that your husband might benefit from some reassurance. He seems anxious." The observation made Grace laugh. "Riley has been in a state of barely controlled panic since I told him about the baby. I've never seen him so unsettled." "It's common enough with first-time fathers," Mrs. Cooper said, "especially out here, where they're so accustomed to being in control of everything. Birth reminds men how little control they actually have." The insight struck Grace as profoundly true. Riley, who faced every ranch challenge with calm competence, who had built their home and business through sheer determination, was utterly helpless when it came to ensuring her safety during childbirth. That evening, after everyone else had retired, Grace found Riley on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. "Can't sleep?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "Just thinking." He placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "You should be resting." "I've been resting all day," Grace pointed out. "Any more resting and I might forget how to walk entirely." A small smile broke through Riley's serious expression. "Mrs. Cooper says that's important in these final weeks." "Mrs. Cooper is wonderful, but she does tend toward caution." Grace leaned into his embrace. "The baby and I are both perfectly healthy, Riley. Try not to worry so much." Riley sighed, his arm tightening slightly around her. "I can't help it. The thought of anything happening to either of you is something that will do no good to dwell on," Grace finished for him. She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "Riley, do you remember what you told me that day by the creek when you proposed? About how the frontier teaches us that sometimes what we need isn't protection from storms, but someone to weather them with us." Riley nodded slowly. "I remember. That's what I need from you now, not fear, not panic, but your steady presence, your trust that we can face whatever comes together." The simple wisdom of her words seemed to reach something deep within him. Riley's expression cleared, the worry lines easing from his forehead. "You're right," he said softly. "Of course you're right." "Usually am," Grace teased gently. Riley laughed, the sound lifting some invisible weight from both of them. "And modest, too." Their shared laughter drifted out into the summer night, a moment of perfect connection that Grace would carry with her into the challenging days ahead. The baby, a daughter they named Alina, after Riley's mother, arrived in the early hours of an August morning, after a labor that was difficult but uncomplicated. Cooper pronounced both mother and child healthy, much to the relief of Riley, who had spent most of the night pacing outside the bedroom door, kept company by Thomas and Samuel Owens. "She has your eyes," Grace told Riley as he held their daughter for the first time, his large hands cradling the tiny bundle with extraordinary gentleness. "And your determination," Riley replied, his voice thick with emotion, "Mrs. Cooper says she's never seen a baby so eager to arrive." Grace laughed weakly, exhausted but exhilarated by the new life they had created together. "She comes by it honestly. Neither of us has much patience." In the days that followed, a new rhythm established itself in the Blackstone household. Grace's world narrowed to the needs of her infant daughter and her own recovery, while Riley divided his time between ranch responsibilities and his new role as father, a position he assumed with the same dedicated attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. Abigail proved invaluable during this time, taking over household management completely and showing a natural affinity with her new niece. Even Samuel, initially awkward around the tiny infant, soon became a devoted grandfather, spending long periods simply watching Alina sleep. "She's perfect," he told Grace one afternoon as they sat together on the porch, the baby sleeping peacefully in her grandfather's arms. "Reminds me of you when you were born." Grace smiled at the comparison. "I hope she inherits your strength and mother's kindness." "She'll have all that and more," Samuel assured her. "With you and Riley as parents, how could she not?" As summer began to transition into fall, Grace found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. Just over a year ago, she had arrived in this valley as a new bride, uncertain what the future held. Now she was a mother, the mistress of a thriving ranch at the center of a growing community, as Thomas's brother and family had indeed joined them over the summer. The waiting of those 2 winters, the time when she had stood at the edge of her father's ranch, watching the horizon for a rider who didn't come, seemed like a lifetime ago. Yet without that period of separation, without the growth and determination it had fostered in both her and Riley, they might not have appreciated so deeply the life they now shared. One evening in late September, with Alina sleeping soundly in her cradle and the household quiet, Grace found Riley on the porch, much as she had that night before their daughter's birth. But his expression now held contentment rather than worry as he gazed out at the land they were building into a legacy. "Happy?" Grace asked, joining him at the railing. Riley turned to her, his face softening with love. "More than I ever thought possible." He drew her into his embrace. "And you, any regrets about choosing this life, about waiting through those winters for a wandering cowboy?" Grace leaned into his strength, thinking of the full circle they had traveled, from first meeting to separation to reunion to marriage to parenthood. Each stage had brought its challenges, its moments of doubt and fear, but through it all, the connection between them had only deepened, proving itself stronger than distance, stronger than hardship, stronger than the isolation of the frontier itself. "Not a single regret," she said with absolute certainty. "Some things are worth waiting for, through winter after winter. You taught me that." Riley kissed her then, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, the seasons that would come and go, the children they might still have, the ranch that would grow and prosper under their care. A future made possible because she had waited and he had returned, just as the first signs of spring had appeared on the Montana horizon. In the years that followed, the Blackstone Ranch flourished, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Alina was joined by 2 brothers, Samuel, born 2 years later, and James, who arrived 2 years after that. Each child brought new joy and challenges, expanding the heart of their family just as their ranch expanded across the valley. Grace never regretted her decision to build a life with Riley in Wyoming, though the frontier remained unforgiving in many ways. There were difficult years, drought seasons that threatened the herd, winters so harsh they lost cattle despite their best efforts, the frightening winter when 5-year-old Alina developed pneumonia and recovered only through Mrs. Cooper's skilled nursing and Grace's relentless care. but there were countless moments of joy as well, watching their children grow strong and capable, seeing the community around them expand as more families settled nearby, celebrating each anniversary of Riley's return with the spring, the day that had changed both their lives forever. When visitors asked, as they sometimes did, how Grace had found the patience to wait through those 2 long winters when Riley was building their future in Wyoming, she always gave the same answer. "The heart knows what it's waiting for," she would say, her eyes finding Riley's across the room. "Even when the mind has doubts, the heart knows." And Riley, the young cowboy who had once believed he needed to prove his worth through worldly success before claiming the woman he loved, would smile at his wife with the same adoration he had shown on the day of their reunion, knowing that the greatest success of his life had nothing to do with cattle or land or wealth. It had everything to do with the love that had survived separation, flourished despite hardship, and continued to grow deeper with each passing season, a love worth waiting for, through winter after winter, until spring brought them together at last.